Thank you. Thank you so much. I am Joy Bach, and Evelina and I were on the morning blend this morning. Had a wonderful time chatting with Molly and Tiffany about When the Hibiscus Falls. And it is such a pleasure to be here with you. How many cities are you touring or doing how many stops do you have?
Is this mic on? I can't tell you how I can rattle them off. That's what I've been doing. So hey mom,
Maybe 15.
yeah, let's see, like 15 or so. Yeah, all over DC, Boston, San Francisco, here, Chicago, Miami.
Nice.
Yeah.
So in every city that Evelina is stopping at, she has a conversation partner. So she had asked me a month or two ago to be her conversation partner. I'm like, what does that mean? Okay, sure, I'll do it. So just a little backstory on how Evelina and I know each other. She's my ate, which means older sister. And growing up here in Milwaukee, I grew up in Greendale. Evelina's family's from Brookfield, and I see all her siblings and her mom here. It was so wonderful growing up in Milwaukee because it's such a tight-knit community. And I'm the youngest of 7. Evelina's the oldest of 6, and our dads came to start their residencies and to start their lives. And as every culture, as you guys know, because many of you were there, families look for one another to lean on and for support. So there were the picnics growing up at Worth Park, UST, university reunions, that kind of thing. So that's how Evelina and I and our families got to know one another. And then I don't think it was until you lived in Chicago, and I don't know how that happened, if I had reached out, but I knew you were a script supervisor at the time, and I was starting to get my feet wet in advertising. So Evelina's like, yeah, why don't you come with me? Come on a set, come on a couple different shoots. And she took me in right away. And even though I didn't know her as well as maybe my siblings did, I felt right away a connection, a bond. And that's what happens when we're raised in a tight-knit, cultural family community. So anyway, as previously mentioned, Evelina is the author of 2 story collections, 2 novels, 1 nonfiction, multiple awards, and professor at University of Miami.
Yep.
So let's just give her another round of applause for gracing us with her presence. So before we get into your personal journey, did you want to start with a reading?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say thank you to everyone for being here. This is very much a hometown reading. I think I recognize all the faces that in here. Wow, we all look a little bit older, don't we? And I also want to thank Tita Bolette and Tita Lily and my mom and you for organizing, and Daniel and the bookstore here for putting this event together, for creating such a lovely spread. I know the Singson kids were in on it too, so thanks, guys. There you are, Jen. Thank you, and Joey. I thought I would start by reading the very opening piece, and I'm going to stand up so you can see me better. And I'm going to do this for you, my mom, because you're such a light in our lives and an inspiration. And this is called Strength is the Woman. And let me say something about Strength is the Woman. It is my version of the Filipino creation story. You might recognize bits and pieces of this if you know that creation story of man and woman, malakas and maganda. But I have decided to tell the true story, and this is it. My mother says to be in the light. Strength is the woman. No one ever gets the story right. Malakas and I lived in the hollow of a bamboo reed. We were lost, tangled up in a thicket of long, thin shoots when a bagyo, heavy with rain and wind, swept us away. The islands were just forming. There was nothing but sea and sky, and these bamboo stalks knocking into one another like tribal drums. During the monsoon, the bamboo circled us, swallowed us up whole. Malakas said he'd find a way to get us out, but all he did was whine. He was cramped. He was hungry. He had to relieve himself. He could not see for the dark. But we could hear the ocean beating on our bamboo pole. We could hear the wind sweeping across the sky. We could hear the cries of prehistoric birds, the prehistoric bird caterwauling like it was lost too. Malakas wept, bathed me in his tears. We drifted in the current, spinning like a compass, never settling on a direction. We were always moving. I liked the dark. I liked the cool shade. I liked the lull of the tide. I found it soothing. And the silence that came when he slept was so peaceful. My body fit right next to his, and if he just learned to relax, we could have been like that forever. My arms stretched high above our heads, fingers poking out at the end of the bamboo like leaves, wet when it rained, warm in the sun, salty. Most days, I closed my eyes and breathed. I used to meditate a lot back then, and if I listened very carefully, I could almost hear a flute-like melody swirling around us. Why aren't you freaking out? He wanted to know. Over what? It is what it is, just chill. And then the bird passed us, heard Malakas say, "Anybody out there, help?" "Hush," I told him. "Breathe," I said. "Relax." But he kept yelling, like the world was on fire. And so the bird swooped down and kissed the tips of my fingers, cawed. "We're stuck," he yelled. "We're hungry. We can't breathe." "Quiet," I told him. That's when the bird struck the reed, slashed the bamboo right in half. And there we were, naked, brown, thin from the narrow bamboo. "You are beautiful," said the bird, reaching its wings to touch me. I gave him the evil eye. And the bird, perched on the edge of the bamboo, lost his balance just as the sea rose and swallowed him up. "No, you stupid bird," Malakas said. "She is strong." And that was the beginning of everything.
I love how later in one of the chapters, Evelina revisits that. Like
Yeah.
it comes back
It does.
in one of your chapters. So those of you who have the book, who may have read the whole book, there's 17 stories. It's a collection. And my question to you is, how do you come up? Well, if you could walk us through some of the themes. So one was the strength of a woman.
Right.
Yeah.
So these stories, they're about ancestry, they're about legacy, they're about women who are constantly in struggle and finding ways to work it out. They are strong women. Some of the women are young girls. Some of them are moms and aunties and lolas. Some of them are women in the spirit world. So the spirit is also, the rituals and spirit are part of the book, and as well as this call to those prehistoric, those pre-colonial myths about the Philippines that we as students at Brookfield East High School never got to read, right? So there I was, out in the world, this young woman with a very strong connection to Milwaukee and the Midwest, and I didn't know those prehistoric stories of my people and my culture. So I bring those into the book. So those are some of the obsessions that are happening in the stories.
I love how you fold in like driving on 94, headed to UW,
Yeah.
little landmarks around Milwaukee that I think everyone would appreciate. So some of the things that I took note of were you touched on like pop culture and history and our traditions, as you were saying. You talk about praying the rosary. COVID, a chapter is dedicated to like what we were going through just a few short years ago, I liked how you wove in folklore like the aswang and how our culture is so wrapped around food, respecting the elderly. You mentioned something about that. I think Molly and Tiffany talked about that, one of your quotes. Do you recall what we talked about earlier today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's funny to talk about Filipino culture to so many Filipinos in the house. But, we respect our elders. We're supposed to respect our elders anyway. We respect our elders. And so I teach at the University of Miami, and I'm watching, it's really interesting how the children are getting younger and younger, the students, and I am remaining the same, right? And as the students of the different generations of college students come through, you start to see a disconnection to people's past, to the stories of, and because I teach creative writing, I ask them to write about some of these things. What are some of the secrets in your family? What are some of the traditions of your people? Who are your people, right? And it's so funny because the younger and younger they get, the less they seem connected to those traditions of the past. And so what I've always been kind of interested in is knowing, especially because, again, growing up in Wisconsin, you don't get this unless it's at home, right? These stories of culture, these traditions, unless we're at that picnic at Worth Park, singing feelings with a band, which does happen in one of the stories here. You don't get that anywhere else. So I kind of felt like there's this need to bring the stories of the past into the work. But I witnessed some of that exchange between the elders and the youth. I talked about this morning, happening. Like I see my nieces, my mom's up here, she's there, Lola. I see my nieces like interviewing her, asking her things about, what was Milwaukee like when she and my dad first arrived here, and what was that Filipino community like. So I think there was a lot of that I was interested in, just naturally, not because I was like looking for a theme. It's just something I need.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think, the byproduct is you're honoring our ancestors in history, but also there's just so much experience and wisdom that the next generation learns from if we focus, give a focus or feature.
Yeah. And then they turn it around, like they make it their own,
Yeah.
and they create a new way of understanding these stories, and kind of like that's the strength is the woman. That first piece that I read to you, the traditional strength is the woman, the original origin story of man and woman in the Philippines. That myth is about how there are these beings that are stuck in this bamboo. And there's no place to land, there's no land. And when this bird comes and it's a hawk, strikes the bamboo, out come man and woman. But guess what? Man is strong, malakas, and woman is maganda, beautiful. But in my experience, women are beautiful and strong. And so so there's that subversion. So, kind of like the hope would be that as we learn these stories, we make them our own and we bring them into the future. They don't just live in the past.
Yeah, love that. Let's talk about some of the characters in these stories. One of your chapters, Hot Mommies, is about a photographer.
Yep.
And you would think at face value, especially like how it starts, she's on set. But then you weave in these backstories or unveil these backstories where she's taking care of a troubled teenager. And there's a reason why she has to step into that role in this time in her life, at this stage in her life. So these characters, and they're all different. There are multiple within each story, obviously, but how do you pick your characters? Where does the inspiration come from?
Okay, so Hot Mommies is actually the main character in Hot Mommies is a woman named Augustina, and she's 35 years old, and she's actually the protagonist of Her Wild American Self. She's actually that teenager. I don't know if anyone has read that story, but that story is about a troubled teen in Chicago, and her kind of difficult relationship with her parents, and being sent to the Philippines from being, troubled, and what happens, in that story. So now, 35 years later, she comes back. So in the case of Hot Mommies, I actually have brought back I brought back a character from the past to see kind of imagine where she might be now.
So with every chapter, I was engrossed with like, oh my gosh, okay, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? And then I would get to the end of the chapter and I wanted more on some of them. I was like, oh, how does it resolve? Like, how did, so some of your endings on the chapters, how do you approach and either wrap up the story or leave it open-ended, that type of thing?
So I love how you keep calling them chapters.
Stories.
There's stories, but that's a really important experience that you had, and they feel like chapters to you because it's so important for the stories not to read like a pile of stories, rather to read like one cohesive book. And so when Joy says chapters, it kind of makes my heart kind of go wah, wah, because that's sort of a goal, right? So to answer your question about endings, oftentimes the stories, the characters, and it's always character-based, have some kind of a question that they're exploring, some kind of a conflict. And for each of these characters, they do their best to find a way to answer the question. And I also have to say, the way I talk about it is something that I got from my niece, Julia, who's not here today. She's in Boston. She once told me when a writer came to her school in Brookfield, that the author said that conflict, and any of you who've studied writing know that conflict is such an important part of story, that conflict is another way of saying, what is the question? What are they trying to answer? So, so the stories are asking a question. And oftentimes in life, for me, I don't know about anyone else in the room, life is messy and endings are not always clean. They're oftentimes very chaotic, oftentimes ask more questions than they actually answer. Once you resolve something, there's another pot of questions right there. So I kind of feel like, when I follow a story to its logical ending, it's trying to resolve that particular question. Yeah. So you can figure out the ending yourself.
I am. So one of the stories, Holy Thursday, I was telling you earlier, it's a chapter that I resonated with the most. And the story is about a mayor and his wife is a former beauty queen, right? There is the caretakers of the mayor in their household, and they have a daughter, Nora. And then the mayor's mother is also a character. And the reason why this particular story resonated with me was because I could see a lot of our Filipino culture represented in each of them. When we were little, we're taught to be, respectful and polite and kind of keep quiet. And in doing so, we observe a lot of things going on, but we may not share it, And that was the character of this little girl, where she was looking to resolve something that was unjust. And she loved the mayor's mother, that she wanted her to be her grandma, And so I see that how we love and have affection for our parents and our elderly. And then I saw the mayor's wife as well, where she's kind of this jealous, wanting the glamorous life kind of thing, you know? So out of all the 17 stories, that was the one that kind of stood out for me. Is there one that stands out for you or that you resonate with the most?
Well, I think all the stories do in a different way for different reasons, you know. I love that story too. I love it because it's from the point of view. It's really the story of that little girl who is the helper in the house, and she takes good care of Lola E. Um, and um, and she really wants to do the right thing by Lola E. And she's seeing funny things going on in that house. So I love that story for all the love that she has, and it's from the child's perspective for the elders in that home. I think all the stories have a different kind of significance. It's like, you have kids, right? Which is your favorite?
Oh, that's easy. That would be, you know.
So yeah, no, I think they're all kind of special in different ways. Yeah.
um, throughout the prose of the different stories, you'll move from English and then you'll slip in some Tagalog words. Yeah. And my question is, what is your editing process? How conscientious do you have to be of, like, do you write what comes to mind and then do you have to go back to make sure you provide the definition, the payoff, so that readers who don't speak Tagalog can follow along?
Right. That's a great question. Great question. So there's Tagalog in here, there's Kapampangan, and there's Spanish, and there's English. So I write in context, and I think that I hope that because the words are in context, that it becomes evident what the words mean. But I also think that it's okay not to know what certain words mean, because, you know, we read, and there's French and there's Greek and there's like, or we read when we're little kids and there are very big words, right, that we don't know what the words are. And then when you read them in context and you can figure it out, I think that's a way of making those definitions evident. But the way I use those different languages is I hear the voices of the characters. Everything is always character driven. I have a sense of like everything about them, from what goes on internally for them, into their interiority, but also what they look like, what they sound like, how annoying they can be, you know, and all their little tics. And so sometimes what is natural for a particular character is to say something in Tagalog, or is to say something in Kapampangan, or is to say something in Spanish, because some of the stories take place in Miami. But I always feel, and at the University of Miami, this is something that I've really cultivated with my colleagues, you know, a kind of program where we center the language of the characters and the story, and we don't decentralize them by having to provide glossary of terms or even italicized words. It's really funny when in 1996, when my first book of stories came out, Her Wild American Self, Coffee House Press, same press as this press, italicized the Tagalog. And the founder of that press, Alan Kornblum, rest your soul, Alan, I think you're here in spirit. He said to me, Evelina, look at this, how when we italicize the Tagalog, it disrupts the page and it breaks up the story. From now on, it's going to be our house practice not to italicize non-English words, because for the characters, that is their dominant language. It is the central language for the characters. So, you know, none of this, you know.
Well, and that's what I love about reading your style, is that it's conversational, it's natural. So it's not full sentences. Sometimes it's an expression, or it's 2 words in a sentence. And yep, that's exactly what I would say in that situation. That's exactly how I'd feel in that situation. You bring up Her Wild American Self, and I want to touch on something in particular, but could you fill us in on your personal journey from writing that first book to coming here.
We have to close at 8. So I started out, at Madison, as a freshman, thinking I was going to do journalism, but I always had this in the back of my mind. I wanted to write stories. And then I couldn't get into any of my journalism classes, so I started to take communication, so radio, TV, and film. And then when I was a junior, I got an internship at Channel 15, NBC affiliate. And one of my bosses is sitting out there. Hi, Dan. Dan, I got to tell you, I just told this story in Chicago. I tell this particular story all the time. So Dan Smith was my producer, and he taught me a lot about television and storytelling, and one of the things the story I'd like to tell, is that I had to learn to be good at details. And I don't know if you remember this. I did You Review the movie. I edited it, and we aired it, and there was a swear word in it. And you were kind of mad. And he said, I don't know. I mean, he might have used different language. He said, I don't know what you have to do, but you got to fix it. You got to get better at detail. And I did. So I worked as a script supervisor. Thank you, Dan. I worked as a script supervisor where it was all about detail. And at some point, I've thought to myself, I do not want to be like 80 years old and wondering if I could have ever written the stories that I really wanted to write, to do the work that I really want, my dream work. My dream work is to write these stories and to be able to teach, others to write their stories. I didn't want to be stuck doing something just to pay rent, right? So I went to grad school. I was writing these stories that weren't even about Filipino American experiences at first. And my teachers pulled me aside and said, why aren't you writing with the details from your life? And those details are things like, like the picnics at Worth Park. Those details are the way people speak to one another, treat one another. In a couple of the events I've been to, people were really kind of overcome by the way family is such an important part of this book, and that there's so much kind of like one of the Filipinos was saying, oh my God, I was like having trauma, but then I came to the end and then I could take a little break, and to me, those are amazing responses, because these are the stories that are our lives that I did not grow up reading. And so, that's how I started that. And then at some point, I had this idea, my film partner and he and I were in Chicago, and we wanted to do a film about the surviving comfort women, not really that, but about a teenager who has a Lola, who's a survivor, and wanted to know what that Lola's lesson would be for that teenager, because it's a troubled teen. When I started to do the research for that, because even though it's fiction, there's a lot of research that goes into the work, I stumbled upon 40 surviving Filipino comfort women of World War II. And they were the lolas, the grannies of this movement in the Philippines. They were women who had been kidnapped, put in military sex slave camps, and used by the Japanese military for their comfort, right? I met them. I learned from them. I thought it was going to be a brief research thing. And then they were like, Evelina, when are you going to tell our stories? And then 20 years later, Lola's House came out, and I think that their influence is very strong. There's only 2 stories in the collection that are about the comfort women, but I think that their influence on me, teaching me what it means, to be strong, to be Pinay, to stand up for oneself, to do the right thing. Yeah, to put your mask on before you put someone else's mask on, right? Is very much a part of the book.
Before we move into Q&A and open it up to everyone here, that was one of the topics that I wanted to make sure that we touch, because I had no idea about comfort women and what they were, and that this was a part of our country's history. But can you talk about briefly how, I mean, you kind of became an activist for them as well?
Well, yes. I mean, as you know, they once you hear them talking, once you hear their stories, and in my case, I got to know them. When I called them Lola, they were really like one of my grandmothers, all 40 of them, and then eventually 16 who were part of the book. They put my hands where their war wounds were, right? So in doing so, it's impossible to just be a bystander. It's impossible to kick back and just say, I'm just going to write these books. And so when they were fighting for justice, I joined them. I was an advocate for them here in the United States. I worked with at the time, Representative Mike Honda from California, and we pushed to get House Resolution 121 passed back in 2007. I think it was 2007 now. And that resolution, and I was in Congress and I witnessed, and I don't think I'll ever see this again, every single representative stand up and say aye for this resolution, which asked Japan to make the formal apology to these women and girls from World War II. So, just background, we think about 1,000 of the women in the Philippines were taken and held. But wherever the Japanese occupied during World War II, China, Korea, Malaysia, even in Japan, Philippines, when we count all those women, count all those souls, we come up with a number closer to 400,000 women. Yeah. And so who cannot, once you get involved, how can you not do something? So I've been very blessed to know them, to advocate for them. My students have also advocated for them. We've gotten signatures, and we've traveled and stood up and read their testimonies because it's so important. And when Lola's House came out, I was in California where one of the universities, lots of Filipino students in the house, and we played some of their videos. And those students came up to me and were so moved because they said, it could have been my Lola. Could have been that looks like my Lola.
Thank you. Thank you for your work and for educating us on that. Yeah, let's give her a round of applause. I have one last question before we take questions. And with the collection of stories and your nonfiction, what do you want your readers to take away from this book, from your writings?
I want my readers who are of Filipino and Filipino American descent to see themselves in literature, to see their stories, to be able to pass that down, to represent to them the possibilities that we can be more than doctors, that we can play in the arts and that we can make a difference. I want my readers who are not of Filipino American descent to have that opportunity to take a glimpse into a beautiful community, to witness some of the interactions of our families, even though they're imagined in this book. Many of the stories have these little, I think I wrote about this on social media the other day, there are fragments and moments that are kind of taken from real, my memories. But there's also a way that they're skewed with my imagination and also some of the facts and the histories and the cultural research I've done. We were talking about this earlier. We were talking about this idea of kapwa. Kapwa is Filipino selfhood. It is the ability to see oneself in the other and to support one another in community. And it was so interesting for me to learn the definition of kapwa as an adult, as a scholar, as a writer, doing my research. Because when I saw that, I thought about all the times Mom and Dad would have people at our house, and they were organizing, and it's FAWIS and the UST. And I always like to tell the story about Canada when we were in Canada, and I was only 3, so I don't really have that memory, but I've seen the newspaper clippings of, my parents supporting Filipino nurses who were unable to get housing. They were being turned away. Every time they tried to, like something looked like it was open, they would show up and the apartment was not available. And so my mom and dad were very much a part of that. And, and all those nights where people come, we go to different houses and there's mahjong going on and we stay there all night and community is tight. Wow. When I saw that definition of kapwa, I realized we've been living kapwa without knowing the definition of kapwa, which means it's really an integral part of our culture. So what I would love is for readers to be able to see, oh, that's what that is. When you hear people always say, oh, the Filipino nurses in my hospital are so friendly, and it's because of kapwa.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this and opening up and bringing everyone into, the backstory of developing this collection of stories. So we're going to open it up. If you guys have any questions for Evelina. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. We'll be around too, if you want to.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. That's a great question. The man walking away is my husband. He is a book critic. He's one of my readers. And he and I have he'll respond to something and we'll have these amazing debates, arguments, one might call them. And then always he doesn't change, readers like him or my editors, they don't actually change the intention of the story for me as much as they give me feedback as to how they're being received and perceived, so that I can then go and refine. I have to figure out the fix to have the story read the way I want it to read. So that kind of feedback actually is super important to me. But it doesn't change the intention. Sometimes it makes me think about something differently. Like there's a story in here called The Kiss, which was, I think, originally called One God, Many Houses. And it was very much a very flippant kind of response to the one who will not be named, who you know who I'm talking about. Y'all know who I'm talking about, right? 2016, yucky, going to be indicted. You know that guy? Okay. So, and it was kind of like my flippant response is a little bit different than the rest. And I think the press was a little bit nervous. Like my editor at the time was a little bit nervous about, the stuff that I was saying, kind of controversial maybe. And I wasn't going to change it. But then I sat with her comments, and a different story evolved, and it was The Kiss. And I don't know if you got there yet, but I would encourage that. Yeah. When you get there, you'll say, oh, this is what she meant. Yeah.
Right here.
Hi. So I have time boundaries, meaning, so I do, as they were saying, I teach, we have grandchildren, super busy life. So I have writing days, and on those days, nothing, I won't do anything else. And sometimes what that means is I'm just thinking, or I'm going for a walk, or I'm reading something that might influence the work that I'm doing, or I'm just writing in a journal. So that's really important to me. And when I'm starting to feel cramped because there's student papers to respond to and all that kind of stuff, I say, oh yes, but Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are my writing days. So I'll be able to go there then. That's one thing that I do to kind of ease the anxiety. And then I do first drafts. I'll do first drafts during that time, or I like to utilize the summer to do that. I also do a lot of research. I've been researching a novel that's in progress for a couple of years now. And then during COVID, I got to sit down and draft 435 pages, first draft of that book. So I just draft, I let it sit. I let time go, and then I come back to the work as a reader. And then I try to be the most critical, even though Chauncey likes to think he's the most critical because he's a book critic. But I do my best then to read as a reader, and then I go back and revise.
Time for one more.
Hi, Tito. Wow, that's a really good question. I'm going to stand up for that. So one day I was on a plane about in 2012, and the stories had already existed. I was on a plane, and this woman sat down next to me, and she was a medium. And she said to me, I feel like in our course of our conversation, she said, I feel like I need to give you a reading. I said, okay, sure. I'm game. So what she said to me was, I see this old woman, and she is offering you a hibiscus, but not just one, over and over and over again. She's offering you a hibiscus. And also strange, she's not calling you by your name. She's calling you River. Why is she calling you River? So this is all the information this woman gave me. I did some research. First of all, those of you know, my mom's from Quezon province. She's Tagalog, makes me Tagalog, Taga-ilog, which means from the river. So this woman who was calling me River, and this woman who's calling me River, I think she's one of my lolas. I don't know which one, but she's one of my lolas. And then this idea too, I was researching the river and the Tagalogs, where they would take their wares, they were culture bearers, and they would go down the river and they would offer their wares. So for me, I'm the one that creates the meaning there. So for me, the stories are like me being a culture bearer and going down the river. The hibiscus blooms for one day and then it dies. So for me, the significance of the hibiscus, I'm a hibiscus of a certain generation. My mother is a hibiscus of her generation. My niece Ligaya, I see her there, and my other nieces here are all like another generation of hibiscus. And at some point, we all reach our opportunity to bloom and to hold space. So when the hibiscus falls for me is about generations of women coming into their own, owning their space, and then making room for the next generation.
Wow.
The rest of us, no.
Probably more than that. We'll find out.
There's more to that.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and joining us. Thank you, Evelina.